Hello and welcome back to DoshTech. Today we're going to be doing a new PC build for 2020 and we're going to start off as usual with the CPU, motherboard and the RAM. So today we're going to be installing this Ryzen 5 3600. This is a 6-core 12-thread part and that runs at 4.2 GHz. And we're also going to be installing some Corsair Vengeance DDR4. This is the LPX variety. And we're going to be putting that all into this Asus Prime B450M-A motherboard, which is a micro ATX board that supports the AM4 platform. And this is of course a 3000 series, and this does support that. So without further ado, let's crack on with things, and we'll get to CPU installation. This motherboard includes one PCI X 16 slot and two x1 slots. It also has the standard audio that you'd expect, USB 3, USB 3.1, HDMI on board, as well as VGA and DVI-I, and we also have the PS2 connections, should you wish to use those. It does have an 8-pin power slot, so it would support the beefier CPUs, but just be aware that the VRM has a lot less cooling than some other models may do. You also have your 6 gigabit ports over here. And then you've also got a USB 3 header. Obviously you wouldn't expect to not find that these days. And obviously the 24 pin itself. And 4 RAM slots, should you wish to use all 4 of them. We're not going to be doing that today. This motherboard also does feature an M.2 SSD slot, so that's a nice inclusion on a board of this price. Moving on to the CPU then, here we have the Ryzen 5 3600. This is a 4.2 GHz processor, and that's a 3.6 base. And that also is a 6-core 12-thread item. So typical AMD packaging you'd expect. There's the CPU on the side there, and here's what you find inside. You've got some installation instructions, which you probably shouldn't have to use if you have done this a few times. There's the processor itself. You also get a little case badge and the cooler, which in this case we're not going to be using. So this is the Wraith cooler that they ship with it. So it's not very large, but it does have pre-applied thermal paste. Okay, so let's get to CPU installation. So here is the Ryzen 5 itself. Just prise that out of its packaging. Same situation as usual. So we've got the lever on the socket, which you need to lift like that. And then the CPU itself will have an indicating triangle on it, which they seem to make smaller and smaller, but it is there, as you can see. And that lines up with the one corresponding on the socket. So just very carefully bring that over and drop that in, 0 insertion force. Apologise if I blocked the camera there, but that is in there. And then we would just lower that down. And there you go, there's the CPU installed. Next thing we want to do, in this particular case, what we're going to do is install the RAM, and then at a slightly later stage we'll install the cooler. So here we have our 2 sets of RAM. This is the Corsair Vengeance variety, LPX. So DDR4, same as every other piece of DDR4 you've ever installed, except this one's got, it only appears to have openings on one side for some reason, but generally a good rule of thumb is to go in the 2 slots the same colour, and if that doesn't work then just put them 2 closest to the CPU socket. So the notch lines up in the middle, and then you just push it. You get a nice click and in it goes, and the little slot there closes up. And then I'm going to do the same with the other black slot, the second stick of memory. These are 8 gigs each, giving a total of 16. So as regular viewers will know, one of my favourite coolers to install on many different builds is the Coolermaster Hyper TX3. It's not a very big cooler, it's only a 92mm fan, but it is nice and quiet. It has excellent cooling performance, 4-pin fan, everything you'd expect, 3 cooling fins on it, and it mounts across Intel or AMD. There are actually larger alternatives to this, such as the Hyper 212, which has been very popular. But I prefer the TX3 as it's just slightly smaller and easier to handle. And obviously these days with CPUs being lower and lower TDP, it's really not going to be coming across its 130 watt TDP limit. So hopefully we can install this quite easily. So here is your AMD mounting hardware. So this bracket goes across the heat fins. This bracket here goes across the bottom of the base plate, and then this one hooks onto the end, and that's what tightens onto the little lock things on the CPU there. I have shown this before on an AM3 computer, which was a very popular video, thank you very much. And that video is basically going to be exactly the same as this one for an AMD CPU, because AM4 in this version is pretty much exactly the same as an AM3 one. So all you want to really work out is what your direction is that you want the heat to be exhausted from. So in this particular case, obviously, this is the I/O shield, so this is the rear of the computer, that's the front, this is the top. So if you have a computer with ventilation up to the top, like my 2018 build, you can have the cooler mounted so that it's blowing, it's exhausting upwards, or you could, if you only have one with a rear vent, you could just have it like that and then have it vent straight out the back. In this case, it does have a top vent, but it also has a rear one which has a pre-installed fan. So what we're going to be doing is mounting it like that, and we can do that as there is adequate clearance on that low profile RAM, which is partly the reason I chose it. Starting as always with the thermal paste. Obviously there's not going to be a lot of use without this, so we shall just simply put a small blob in the middle. I shall try not to block the camera when I do this, but I usually manage it, so that should be about right there, if not a little too much. So with this cooler, what you want to do is you want to get this piece here and you want to slot it, depending on which orientation you have, either across here like that, in the grooves that you can see there, or you want to put it through the two middle heat pipes and put it in the grooves like that, and that's what locks it into place basically, this bracket here, as I shall now demonstrate. Now, whilst I said this is easier than a 212, it's still slightly fiddly, as most of our heatsinks are, but I shall just plop that on the middle there and wiggle it about a bit to spread some of that compound, and I'll put it through this way so that the lever is actually at the top of the case. There we go. Taking this piece here, I'm going to put it in the unlock position, which is like that, as opposed to the lock position, which would be like that. And I'm going to take these two slots here and line those up with the two slots on that bar that we threaded through. So what you now want to do is you have these two prongs sticking out here. You want to line this up so that the out, as you can see, this sticks out to this side. If you have it the other way, it'll hit the heatsink and you won't be able to tension it up. So you just want to have it in the unlock position, which is like that, as opposed to the lock position, which is like that. And then hook that over those two prongs whilst holding the other end of that bracket so that it doesn't come off. And as you can see, those two prongs are stuck through there, which means it's locked on properly. You can now, a little bit of force, hook that over that little prong thing there, and then you can simply turn that, and that tightens that. That has now tightened that to a point where you can actually lift the whole motherboard. As you can see, it's a very solid mount. Only thing we have to do now is hook the power cable up. So there are two power headers here, and the lower one is marked on the board as CPU fan. To neaten this up, what you usually do is, what I usually do is take the yellow marker off there, because it does make a bit of a mess, and then just wrap it around here like that, and that is your motherboard, RAM and cooler installed. Should you require to move the fan to the rear of the cooler because your case does not have a top vent and the fan is hitting on the top of your RAM, you can move it by taking these plastic brackets off, unscrewing the fan, screwing them to the other side of the fan, and then reattaching the whole assembly to the other side of the heatsink. Today we are building in the Corsair Carbide 88R. On the front panel, this case features a USB 2, USB 3, microphone and audio jacks, as well as the power and reset button. It has side ventilation, it also has top ventilation, which is not filtered, and it also has a windowed side panel. It includes a 120mm case fan in the rear, the 4 standard slots you'd expect in this form factor, and a rear mounted bottom power supply with a filtered intake. The 3.5-inch hard drive cage takes 3 hard drives and is removable. and there is also a 5¼ inch bay should you wish to use that. Included is the instruction manual, the hard drive mounts, and some generic hardware. So let's get on and install everything in the case. This has filtered intakes on the front panel, which just pops off, and also has this removable tray here so that we can put a 5¼ inch bay in, which we will be doing in this case. You can also see I have pre-installed two 120mm fans. This does not take 140s. First thing I'm going to do here is untie these cables so we can get them out of the way and check the motherboard fitment. It does have pre-installed standoffs, so we'll need to make sure that none of those are shorting on the back of the board and remove the ones that we don't need. Now that I know all the standoffs are correct, I will install this I/O shield. With the case is a bag of hardware, including these screws which fit the motherboard. Having installed the I/O shield and made sure that the threads are correct and that the standoffs are in the right location, you can take some of these screws, lifting the motherboard by the heatsink. We should get this slowly into position. Pop that there. I'm just going to thumb one of these screws in. Next thing I'm going to do is move the front panel out of the way and install the power supply. During the current climate, it's rather difficult to get a decent quality power supply, so in the end I had to overpay for a CX550M. There's plenty of budget options of course, however they are of dubious quality. So what I'm going to do is poke the CPU power and the 24 pin through the hole at the back. Next up, I'm going to handle the rather fiddly business of the front panel connectors, which are, of course, all very tiny connections, notoriously difficult to understand. Now, the front panel is on this board is here, and it does have a very small diagram. I'll tell you what each of them do. Hard drive LED. Okay, now that I've managed to sort out the front panel connectors, I'm going to move on to managing some of these cables. Here we have the two front fans on this particular lead. This is the 24 pin, so we'll want to put that through there. There we go. So in this instance we've gone for a standard, possibly slightly outdated you could say, but it's the standard arrangement of a mechanical storage drive and a SSD boot drive. So pop that in there like that, clicks into place, got a nice area down the bottom that we can tuck that 24 pin later. Okay, so whilst we're on the subject of drives, I'm going to install a CD drive, DVD drive, whatever. So just lift that little tab out. Quite a nice simple mechanism actually, and certainly makes things a lot easier without the cables obviously. So what I'll do now is install the power cables for the modular supply, and then we can get on to the exciting things like the graphics card. And now time for the RTX 2060. This is a 6 gig NVIDIA card. It's not a super or anything, it's just a standard one. So line it up with a slot. And in it goes. Just need to install some power, and then it'll be good to go. And that there is the completed build. See, I managed to route most of these cables around the back and tie them down, which I'll show you in a second. And this particular power supply uses 2 separate PCI connectors on the same lead, so I've just hidden that one down there in the hard drive cage, where I've also hidden the slack for the 24 pin. And that's it basically. I'll turn it around and show you the back. So there we go, that's the rear of the case. As you can see, cable tied most of these. There's the SSD there, and the bulge in the side panel should cover most of this quite nicely. Not the neatest job, but then again, you won't be seeing it, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so I flipped the power switch, things have lit up inside. Let's go ahead and turn it on. Fans are ramped down. And there we go. 16 gigs of RAM. Ryzen 5 3600. Both of our hard drives are detected and our DVD drive. For end-to-end setup. And there we go, that's the DoshTech 2020 build. Apologies for the below par camera work and the differing audio levels, but as regular viewers can tell, this isn't my usual operating table. Nevertheless, we got it built and I think it looks quite neat. Full specs list will be in the video description as usual. Please like, subscribe, all the usual gubbins. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon, back on DoshTech. And hopefully it won't be in 2.5 years' time.